Well, good morning. I'm thrilled that you're getting to see our space. I'm currently being Grand Mayor more than being CEO. But I'm excited that technology allows me to be with you. So, as you've seen when you arrived, we have one building on the property of St. Mark's United Methodist Church. You should know my background is ministry, children, youth, and family ministry. And so when I took this position, one of my goals was really to figure out how we could better integrate ourselves in with the sea of church of what we do. And so when it became apparent that we needed a much more stable housing for our summer intern class, it made sense to me to go look for churches that have a lot of property, we're property rich, to figure out if we could be an asset to the church and also just stop having to come close to being in homeless ministry for summer interns every summer. So that's what I did. And we had 3 churches to choose from. And I was trying to make that choice based on a couple of things. Was the building in adequate condition for us to be able to repurpose it? As I don't know what y'all's backgrounds are, but in the United Methodist Church, we had a lot of churches to choose from that weren't in great shape as far as a congregation anymore. So I had 3 to choose from that were struggling congregations that we were trying to figure out, okay, which one of these, one, had a good location, because that really mattered. Our interns are deployed all over the city. 2, which one had facilities that if we went in, we could do, I'm getting in the truck so that you don't have a whole bunch of first grade soccer players around you. And so we needed a facility that was actually able to be remodeled into dorm style housing. And then the final one was a congregation that could potentially see Project Transformation as its legacy, that even when the congregation might cease being there, that there would still be a ministry presence on the campus. So we chose St. Mark's because it met all 3 of those criteria. In the United Methodist Church, the person who is over the San Antonio area is called a district superintendent. So the district superintendent and I went to the congregation, to their 3 leaders, to basically say, we would like to consider being your legacy that you left. And they said no, like not just no, but like no. So I kind of and I kept having conversations with people, and quite honestly, God just kept saying, no, I really think that's where you're supposed to be. And so I kind of dug into like, okay, well, we're going to have a lot of things to work out. We changed district superintendents. I pitched it to him as well. And at this point, Project Transformation was in the Rio, Texas conference. So we actually were a ministry supported. We've never been supported completely financially, but we were physically in the conference office and we're a ministry of the conference. We went back a year later when the church's financial situation was even worse, and we got a maybe. And it wasn't a really positive maybe, but it was enough for me, the eternal optimist, to begin running. So we, within the United Methodist Church, the district committee is called the district strategy team. And the trustees person on that had handed me his card when I was pitching to them that this is what we wanted to do, and said, hey, if you ever need anything, call me. And if you say that to me, I'm probably going to call you at some point. And so I reached out to him about 6 months later and said, look, if I'm going to come in and take over this property, it makes sense to me that somebody who owns a construction company would walk alongside me. So Metropolitan Contracting came in with us. We hired a really innovative architect, which I think was also really important, that they weren't kind of standard thinking architects. And we began the dreamscape of what it could look like. So if you look above your heads, there's some really attractive black pipe up there. And that black costs it cost us right around $100,000 because we had to become a hotel style facility. So the architects basically said, we're going to do that with you. And so we began to dreamscape it. In the middle of this, we had to work through the denominational discipline to basically figure out how could we own one of the buildings that was on the property. In the 6 months of figuring that out, it was going to cost us anywhere in the neighborhood of $15,000 to $20,000 to resurvey that property so that we owned the parking lot and the building. And so we went back to the church and said, we'd really rather have a ground lease for the building. And so that's what we did. And that ground lease was, it's a 12-page document that I was very lucky. We had a very qualified real estate attorney that did the work for me pro bono. And I kept saying to her, oh, no, it's the church. It's fine. We don't have to write that in there. And she kept saying, oh, no, I'm your attorney and we're writing it in there. Friends, good fences, good neighbors. And that document has saved us 3 times now. So one of the things I would say to you is it's really hard for those of us who work on faith to end up pharisaical in the legal document, but it's also very important that both sides understand what they're doing. So we had a conference meeting with the church. This was in the fall of 2019 for them to authorize this. And there was one lone no vote at the church side. And I went up to him afterwards and I introduced myself and said, I want to buy you coffee. I want to get to know you. I think your concerns are valid. And we took the property. We became an independent 501c3 and we took the property January 1 of 2020. Maybe some of y'all remember January when there was a thing called COVID. I think we called it Corona at that point. And we began a capital campaign on February 1st of 2020. And we started construction in March, in the middle of then getting to shut everything down. We became the only activity on that property during that time. There was not a lot of activity on that property. The worshiping congregation at that church on a good Sunday is 30, and you can see the size of that property. I also was having a lot of conversations about what is a way that potentially a new church could come in. When the church was built, it was one of the first suburbs in San Antonio, and it was a white suburb, and it's a white church. The demographic of the neighborhood now is over 90% Hispanic. So all of those things were happening at the same time. The one lone no vote ran the food pantry at the church, and they are all over 70. And people, while we were doing construction, were showing up on Wednesdays for food assistance. But we were the only ones there. So I called him and said, look, we would like to continue doing food assistance on Wednesday. My board chair and I will gather the food and come up here. And he said, I shouldn't have voted no. So that part we did manage. God gave us an opportunity to be able to change his vote. We finished the construction in July. And at that point, I had spent close to $500,000 getting that building turned into that. And I just didn't want it to be empty. So I said, hey, we're going to move our offices in here. And so we did. Again, that was not a part of the original plan, but I didn't want an empty building. And it gave us plenty of space to have social distance and be safe in COVID. So we did that. That decision has really integrated us into the neighborhood. It's definitely integrated us into the church. We are without a doubt the most consistent presence on that property, which has really enabled us to anchor that. I had a premise when we chose that congregation, that churches are oftentimes the largest landowners in a neighborhood. And when the church declines, so goes the neighborhood. My premise was, what if you stabilize that property? Can you stabilize a neighborhood? Now, there's a lot of other factors. PT can't take all the credit for that, but we have the tiniest bit of data to now show us that the neighborhood is more stable than what it was when we took over the property. Now, I don't know whether that's going to hold. The other thing that we did is we have sub meters on our building that measured at that point. It was before the first snowpocalypse, although the first snowpocalypse happened with us in there. And as utilities went up, gas has changed. So we had water and we had electricity. And 4 months ago, Mary, we added a $4,000 gas submeter so that we pay the church our utilities based on usage, not based on percentage, not based on goodwill, not based on income. And that too has been a decision that has saved us. That is in that same ground lease. We did that because at some point, I don't believe the St. Mark's congregation can turn. I don't believe it, as what it was, will go back to being a thriving congregation. Anyway, that ground lease having the utilities in it in January of this year, that we've had a couple of pastor changes just in our 3 years. And that ground lease really enabled us to say, no, these are the rules we've been playing by. We will always cover our cost so that us being on your campus doesn't cost your congregation. But because we don't imagine the St. Mark's congregation really being able to come back to life, no matter what happens, we are set. The next thing I'm doing is I'm fixing to have a meeting this week. We have had verbal first right of refusal. If the church closes, Project Transformation would take the entire property. But I'm going to get that in writing too, because a lot of things are transient, and pastors and currently the state of the United Methodist Church are two of those. So we really want to make sure that we are secure in that. Our ground lease is for 50 years, but we would really like to have a little bit more control over what happens to the property if the church closes. In the United Methodist Church, churches are held in trust to the conference. So the congregation, if it closed, the property would revert back to the conference, unless before it closes in the United Methodist Church, a congregation with the consent of the district can gift to another nonprofit, which is the work we are fixing to begin to get all of that codified in a legal document. So that's a very brief version of 5 years of politics in the church, financing by Project Transformation, and a lot of other things to make this happen. But I've been committed to repurposing church congregation property for over a decade. And this one really just gave me a lab to figure out some of the details. Ask me questions.
Yes, ma'am.
How did the utility issue arise? Is there a between you and the church that...
The utility issue arose because the congregation is running out of money. And every time they begin to run out of money, they look around to figure out, is there an income source? We are not an income source. All we want to do is make sure that we are on the property in a positive way and that we are not costing the congregation anything for our ministry to happen there. So whenever they end up financially constrained in a new way, they come to us thinking, oh, here's a nonprofit that looks loaded. Let me assure you, we are not. And maybe they can help cover some of the cost. So that was one of the reasons the attorney really wanted to make sure the utilities were codified based on usage, not based on feelings.
But it showed up as an invoice in your email inbox, right?
It did. Literally, I got handed an envelope and I opened the envelope and there was an invoice. And it said, hey, here's your 1/3 bill for the utilities. And I reached out to the chair of trustees of the church and the pastor. We actually had my property director and I had a meeting with the people who had devised that and basically said, no, this is not what the ground lease says, of which some of them had never seen the ground lease. So we're not pay 1/3. We're going to pay what our usage is. In that meeting is where it arose that we had not been paying gas, because at the time of the building, gas was so minimal. Our property chair just basically said, there's no reason to spend that money. We should have done it at the beginning and we wouldn't have ended up in that position. But we installed a $4,000 gas submeter in Mary's office and we started paying 1/3 of gas.
Just a curiosity question. So you said you did a capital campaign, and was that through just the general United Methodist congregations or larger, or who were you targeting?
So we are very blessed to be supported by the United Methodist Church, but not in a way that would even keep us alive. But one of the things I did when we began this conversation is that within the Rio, Texas conference, I think 8 or 9 years ago, we made a commitment that if an urban church was sold, the money would be reinvested in urban renewal. And so I knew about that pocket of money because of work I had been doing. And the district came alongside as a primary funder in this work. So they laid $100,000 on the table for us in order to make sure that people would know we had the initial funding we needed to be able to do the work. And then the rest of it, I began to raise. All those signs you see outside of doors are a part of that. Friends, we only raised a little more than half of what we needed, because you don't keep running a capital campaign when people are hungry during a pandemic. I shut the whole thing down. I was really hopeful we could restart it, but capital campaigns are very difficult to restart. So January 1st, we will take on about $190,000 worth of a now not low interest loan to be able to continue paying that off. It's money that was worth it to us to invest that way. We were going to have to pay for housing no matter what, and I'd rather be paying myself.
If you can talk a little bit more about getting the congregation, the resistance, and how you got through that.
Well, I don't know that I'm through it. See, that I received in January. I think a lot of it has to have to do with relationship. The current pastor of the church has my cell number when she needs to talk, whether that's about PT or just about frustrating church members, or maybe about something that's happened in the neighborhood. I consider myself a partner with the church. And so I'm going to always make us in that. We have potlucks with their very skeletal, but with their church staff. I show up when I can to church events. Like, we don't consider ourselves a part of the property. We consider ourselves a part of the church ministry. Yeah. So, I mean, most of it is just trying to stay in conversation. And when I got that invoice in January, I immediately reached out to the pastor and sent an email to the chair of trustees saying, hey, I have no idea where this came from, what's going on. And we want to sit down at the table and talk about this. We don't want to do an email exchange. We want to work through this with you. But I'm for some reason going to try to resurrect the neighborhood garden. So we're fixing to do this all over again by putting the church members in a room with their neighbors, many of whom have never met them. But I'm not going to stop, because I really think that the relationship is what matters in ministry. And so we're going to keep staying at the table. And when problems arise, we're going to keep saying, we want to come back to the table and work this out. We're also going to keep reminding the church that we want to be their legacy. Even when the church ceases to be a worshiping community, we want there to continue to be a ministry presence on that property.
Cressida, I wonder if you could just close us with a comment of, I'm not gonna stop. I mean, I have heard you speak about, you're passionate only about this project for project formation, but just what is work, these types of partners and relationships mean the broad church in general right now. So I wondered if you just like, as your kind of closing thoughts on that side of things, of just what you're seeing as you're looking to do this in other places and for other projects, just kind of end us with a few of your thoughts around that higher level and any encouragements or things to eyes out for that you'd just share with a group of friends who are navigating these same dynamics.
Well, so friends, I'm sad I'm not getting to meet you and hear your stories, but the situation that the church is in is not United Methodist. It's not San Antonio. It's across the nation. And if the church doesn't figure out a way to do new millennial ministry, the church is rapidly becoming irrelevant. And I don't want to be irrelevant. I want to be Jesus in the neighborhood. And so some of what Project Transformation allowed me to do was work my passion out for a set of property to be seen as a safe and nurturing place, not a place where people are excluded. You've probably noticed all the signs on the property. There's more telling you what you can get arrested for than how you can fall in love with God. Now, I don't have any of those signs on our building, and I'm committed to continue showing up in a way that makes the neighbors know God loves them because the church is present, not the opposite. But that is slow, steady, faithful work. There is no short-term, and there's also no cheap answer. That the things most of us are trying to do, they cost a lot of money because we all have these properties that need a lot of maintenance and a lot of care, and they were not built when we were really doing ministry the way we do now. But that means you have to do deep listening to people's fears about what they're going to lose when they repurpose their property. I have said, I don't know, hundreds of times to every church member, which there's only 30 of them, so it didn't take long. We want worship there as long as you want. When they said, I said, tell me your dreams. And 9 of the 11 said their dream was to have their funeral there. And I said, I can make that happen. You don't need to. You think I'm making it up?
It just sounds more like a threat.
But don't be afraid. I think you have to listen to what their fears are, because their fears are real. And most of the people that were sitting in that room kept the property alive, which is the only reason we were able to come in. I want to honor their legacy. So go forth and do the same thing. And don't be mean to the people who are super grumpy because you're going to repurpose their property.